she whispered. "Pretend to hug me." Unaware the stranger was a lethal mafia boss. Now, trapped in his world, can she escape his deadly grip, or will she fall for the man who controls everything? The bass thundered through Violet's chest as she leaned back in her chair, watching the crowd pulse around her. The trendy downtown bar sparkled with possibility, or maybe that was just the gin and tonic working its magic. Either way, she felt invincible tonight. "To the new PR director!" Her best friend Katie raised her glass, nearly spilling her martini in her enthusiasm. Violet clinked glasses, grinning. "I still can't believe they picked me." "Are you kidding? You're brilliant at what you do." Katie's eyes suddenly widened as she glanced past Violet's shoulder. "Speaking of brilliant, check out Tall, Dark, and Dangerous at 2 o'clock." Violet turned, trying to be subtle. The man stood out like a shark in a goldfish pond. While everyone else swayed to the music in their casual Friday best, he remained perfectly still in an impeccably tailored suit. His dark eyes swept the room with predatory focus. "He looks way too serious." Violet mused, the gin making her brave. "I bet I can make him smile." Katie's eyebrows shot up. "Vi, no. Vi, yes." Violet stood, smoothing down her black dress. "Watch and learn." Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached him. Up close, his presence was even more imposing, all sharp angles and contained power. But Violet Carmichael hadn't gotten where she was by backing down from a challenge. "Excuse me," she said, pitching her voice just loud enough to carry over the music. His dark eyes locked onto hers. "Would you pretend to hug me?" For a moment, something dangerous flickered across his face. Then his arms came around her, and Violet's playful confidence wavered. His embrace wasn't the awkward, hesitant hug she'd expected. Instead, it was possessive, almost crushing. His cologne wrapped around her senses, expensive and masculine, as his fingers pressed into her back. When he finally released her, Violet stepped back on unsteady legs. She forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her ears. "Thanks for being a good sport." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My pleasure." Violet retreated to her table, her skin still tingling where he'd touched her. Katie stared at her with wide eyes. "That was intense," Katie whispered. "Yeah." Violet grabbed her drink, needing something to do with her hands. She could still feel his gaze boring into her back, and suddenly the bar felt too small, too confined. Maybe we should call it a night. She'd wanted to make him smile, but instead, she couldn't shake the feeling she'd just played with fire and was about to get burned. Violet's hangover wasn't nearly as bad as it should have been, considering how many cocktails she'd had the night before. She smiled to herself as she settled into her desk at work, remembering the ridiculous prank she'd pulled on the stranger at the bar. The memory of his rigid posture and the way his muscles had tensed under her touch made her cheeks flush. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. A text from Sarah, her best friend from last night, lit up the screen. "Oh my God, Vi. You're not going to believe this. That guy you hugged? Just found out who he is." Violet rolled her eyes and typed back. "Let me guess. He's a movie star? Male model?" 3 dots appeared then. Dante DeLuca. The Dante DeLuca. The Scorpion. The freaking Mafia boss. A laugh bubbled up in Violet's throat, but it died as quickly as it came. She'd heard that name before. Everyone in the city had. The Scorpion was notorious, a shadow that loomed over the city's underbelly. But it couldn't be the same guy. The man she'd hugged had been dangerous looking, sure, but her denial lasted until that evening. The cafe was quiet, just how she liked it for her after-work coffee. She was scrolling through her phone when the air in the room changed. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up before she even looked up. He sat at a corner table with 3 other men in expensive suits, but it was his presence that dominated the room. The same broad shoulders she'd wrapped her arms around, the same sharp jaw and dark eyes. Eyes that suddenly locked onto hers with predatory focus. Dante DeLuca, the infamous Mafia boss. And she'd drunkenly asked him for a hug. Violet's hands trembled as she gathered her things. She could feel his gaze following her every movement, like a physical touch across her skin. This had to be a coincidence, she told herself. Just because they frequented the same places didn't mean anything. But as she hurried out into the growing darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs, she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this was coincidental at all. The click of Violet's heels echoed through the empty parking garage as she made her way to her car. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that made her quicken her pace. Her day had been long enough without letting paranoia get the best of her. A scrape of boots against concrete made her freeze. Before she could turn, a rough hand clamped over her mouth. The stench of cigarettes and cheap cologne filled her nostrils as she was yanked backward into the shadows between 2 concrete pillars. Her purse clattered to the ground, spilling its contents across the dirty floor. "Don't scream," a gravelly voice warned, dragging her toward a white van with tinted windows. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. She kicked backward, connecting with her attacker's shin, but his grip only tightened. The world tilted sideways as panic clouded her vision. The metallic bang of a door being thrown open cut through the garage. "Let her go." The voice was low, deadly, calm, and familiar. Violet's attacker spun around, pulling her with him like a shield. But before he could speak, a blur of movement shot past her. The hand over her mouth disappeared as she was shoved aside, her shoulder hitting the concrete pillar. When her vision cleared, she saw him, Dante DeLuca, his expensive suit jacket discarded, sleeve rolled up to reveal corded forearms as he slammed her attacker face first into the van's side panel. The thug's head bounced off the metal with a sickening crack. "You touch what's mine," Dante growled, each word punctuated by another blow. "You die slowly." Blood sprayed across the van's white paint. Violet pressed herself against the pillar, unable to look away as Dante methodically broke the man down. His movements were precise, almost elegant in their brutality. When he finally stepped back, his knuckles were slick with red. But his face remained eerily calm. He turned to her, those dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Get her in the car," he ordered. And suddenly 2 men in black suits materialized from the shadows. "Make sure she's comfortable. Wait," Violet protested, finding her voice. "I can't." "You can, and you will." Dante's tone left no room for argument. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, bringing with him the metallic scent of blood and expensive cologne. "That wasn't a random attack, Violet. And until I figure out who's targeting you, you're staying where I can protect you." Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine, equal parts fear, and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. "I didn't ask for your protection," she whispered, hating how her voice trembled. A dark smile curved his lips. "You did, actually. The moment you asked me to hug you in that bar, you became my responsibility." He nodded to his men. "Take her to the penthouse. I'll deal with this mess." As the suited men guided her toward a sleek black SUV, Violet realized with crystal clarity that her life had just changed irrevocably. She'd stepped into Dante DeLuca's world, and there would be no easy way out. The sleek black car glided through the city streets, its tinted windows concealing the tension within. Violet sat rigidly in the leather seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stole glances at the man beside her. Dante DeLuca remained silent, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead, as the city lights played across his sharp features. The events of the night felt surreal. One moment she'd been walking to her car, the next. Violet shuddered, trying to push away the memory of rough hands grabbing her. She could still hear the sickening crunch when Dante had dealt with her attacker. The car pulled up to a towering high-rise, all glass and steel reaching toward the stars. Dante stepped out first, then extended his hand to help her. Violet ignored it, climbing out on her own. "This way," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The elevator ride was suffocating. Violet could feel the heat radiating from his body in the enclosed space. Smell his expensive cologne mixed with something metallic that made her stomach turn. Blood, she realized with a jolt. The penthouse doors opened to reveal a massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything was modern, minimalist, and cold, from the stark white walls to the black leather furniture, just like its owner. "Make yourself comfortable," Dante said, disappearing down a hallway without another word. Violet paced the room, her heels clicking against the marble floors. This was insane. She needed to leave, to get as far away from this man and his dangerous world as possible. She made it halfway to the door when a large hand pressed against it, keeping it firmly shut. "Going somewhere?" Dante's voice was soft, dangerous. Violet spun around, finding herself trapped between him and the door. "I appreciate your help tonight, but I'm leaving." "No." His dark eyes bore into hers. "You're not safe out there. Someone tried to take you, Violet. That wasn't random." "So what? I'm your prisoner now?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You're under my protection. There's a difference." "I didn't ask for your protection. You didn't have to." He stepped closer, and Violet pressed herself against the door. "One night. Stay one night, while I handle this situation. Unless you'd prefer to take your chances with whoever tried to grab you tonight?" Violet's shoulders slumped in defeat. He was right. She had nowhere else to go, no way to protect herself if they came after her again. "Fine. One night." Dante nodded, satisfaction flickering across his face. But as he turned away, Violet couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a deal with the devil himself. Violet's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she paced the living room for what felt like the 100th time. The city lights twinkled beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, a beautiful view that felt more like a gilded cage. She hadn't slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the previous night's violence and the enigmatic man who'd turned her world upside down. Morning light crept into the penthouse, and with it came Dante. He appeared in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly damp from a shower. The dangerous edge from the night before was masked beneath a veneer of civility, but his eyes still held that predatory gleam. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Perfectly comfortable, considering I'm being held against my will." Violet shot back, lifting her chin in defiance. A ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Breakfast is ready. Join me." It wasn't a request. The dining room was a study in modern luxury. All clean lines and expensive materials. A spread of fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee waited on the sleek table. Violet sat stiffly in the chair he pulled out for her, watching as he took his place at the head of the table. "Why am I here?" she asked, wrapping her hands around a warm coffee cup. "Why? Did you save me last night?" Dante took a slow sip of his espresso, studying her over the rim of the cup. "Business," he said simply. "There are things in motion you don't understand." "Then help me understand," she pressed, frustration coloring her voice. His jaw tightened. "The less you know, the safer you'll be." Violet felt the weight of his gaze on her skin like a physical touch. Despite her fear, despite everything she knew about who and what he was, Something dangerous stirred in her chest. The way he moved, the quiet authority in his voice, the subtle flecks of muscle beneath his expensive suit. It all drew her in like a moth to flame. "How long do you plan to keep me here?" she asked, hating how her voice softened. "As long as necessary." His eyes locked with hers, intense and unyielding. "I protect what's mine." Heat bloomed in her cheeks. "I'm not yours." His smile was slow and predatory. "We'll see." Violet turned back to her untouched breakfast, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was trapped in the scorpion's lair, and the most terrifying part wasn't his dangerous reputation or the violence she'd witnessed. It was the way her body responded to his presence. The treacherous pull she felt toward him. She needed to find a way out before she forgot why she should want to leave at all. The meeting room buzzed with tension as Violet followed Dante through the door. 5 men in expensive suits sat around a polished oak table, their faces hardening at her presence. She felt like a lamb walking into a den of wolves. "Gentlemen," Dante said, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. He didn't bother introducing Violet as he took his seat at the head of the table. She noticed how the others shifted in their chairs, their bodies angling toward him like flowers seeking the Sunday Violet perched on a chair near the corner, trying to make herself invisible. The air felt thick with unspoken threats and carefully measured words as the men discussed territory and profits. She watched Dante, noticing how different he was here, like a switch had been flipped. His shoulders were set with authority, his jaw tight, with barely contained power. "With all due respect, boss," one of the men spoke up, his voice grating against the quiet. "Moving into the east side now would be a mistake." The temperature in the room seemed to drop, Dante's dark eyes fixed on the speaker, and Violet's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that look before in nature, documentaries, right before the predator struck. "A mistake?" Dante's voice was soft, dangerous. "Tell me, Marco, when did you become the authority on my business decisions?" Marco's face drained of color. "I didn't mean..." "Choose your next words carefully." Dante didn't raise his voice or move a muscle, but the threat was clear as glass. Marco's mouth snapped shut. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he lowered his gaze. "My apologies, boss." I spoke out of turn. The meeting continued, but Violet couldn't shake what she'd witnessed. This was Dante's true face, the ruthless leader who could silence a room with a look. Yet, when his eyes met hers across the table, something flickered in their depths. Something that made her heart skip a beat. After the meeting, Dante's hand found the small of her back as he guided her out. His touch was firm but careful, like he was handling something precious and dangerous at the same time. "Your life is part of my business now," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." Violet suppressed a shiver, knowing she should be terrified. Instead, she found herself drawn to the complexity of this man, the cold-blooded leader who touched her with such careful possession. She was falling into his world, and the scariest part was that some hidden part of her wanted to. The penthouse fell silent as night crept in, wrapping the city in darkness. Violet sat on the edge of the bed, in the guest room, her fingers absently tracing the silk sheets. The luxury felt foreign, almost suffocating, like everything else in Dante's world. The door opened, without warning. Violet's heart jumped as Dante filled the doorframe, his presence commanding the space like he commanded everything else. He wore a black button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the strong lines of his forearms. His dark eyes found hers, and the air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice low and rough. "I'm fine." Violet lifted her chin, refusing to show how his presence affected her. "Is there something you need?" Dante moved closer, each step deliberate. The mattress dipped as he sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and darkly masculine. Without warning, he reached out, catching a strand of her hair between his fingers. The gentle way he tucked it behind her ear contradicted everything she knew about him, every violent thing she'd witnessed. "You're not scared of me anymore," he observed, his thumb grazing her cheek. "Should I be?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or memory. "Everyone else is. Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Dante's jaw tightened. He stared at the wall, seeing something far beyond the room. "My father taught me early that trust gets you killed. He proved it when he tried to have me eliminated to take over the family business." His laugh was bitter, hollow. "I was 17, learned quick that power is the only currency that matters." Violet's breath caught. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. This was Dante DeLuca the Scorpion, the man who ruled through fear, showing her a glimpse of the wounds that made him. "Is that why you keep everyone at arm's length?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers, dark and intense. "Everyone except you, it seems." The admission sent heat coursing through her veins. She knew she should pull away, maintain the distance between them, but something in his vulnerability drew her in, made her want to understand the complexity of the man beside her. "Why me?" she whispered. Instead of answering, Dante stood, his walls sliding back into place. But his fingers lingered on her cheek for a moment longer than necessary, the touch burning into her skin. "Get some sleep, Violet," he said, his voice rough with something unspoken. "Tomorrow won't be easy." He left as suddenly as he'd arrived, leaving Violet alone with the ghost of his touch and the dangerous realization that she was starting to see past his carefully constructed facade. The man beneath the monster was just as dangerous, not because of his violence, but because he made her want to know more. She lay back on the silk sheets, knowing sleep would be impossible now. The memory of his confession played in her mind, along with the terrifying knowledge that she was falling for the very man she should fear most. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dante's penthouse, but Violet felt nothing but darkness closing in around her. 7 days. 7 days of being watched, controlled, protected, or imprisoned, depending on how you looked at it. Her fingers trembled as she grabbed her purse from the sleek marble counter, inching toward the elevator. Just a few more steps. Going somewhere? Dante's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Violet's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned to find him blocking her path, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. His dark eyes held that predatory gleam that made her pulse quicken from fear or desire. She wasn't sure anymore. "I can't do this anymore," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm not your prisoner." In 3 long strides, he closed the distance between them. His fingers wrapped around her arm, firm but not painful. "You're not going anywhere." "Why?" Violet yanked her arm away. "Why am I really here, Dante?" "Because this isn't just about protection anymore, is it?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. For a moment, his careful control slipped, revealing a flash of raw emotion that made her breath catch. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold calculation. "You want answers?" His voice dropped low. "Fine. The Rossi family thinks they can use you to get to me. They've been watching, waiting. The moment you step outside alone, you're dead." "But why would they?" A commotion from the hallway cut her off. One of Dante's men burst in, face pale. "Boss, Marco's been compromised. He's been feeding information to the Rossis about her." The change in Dante was instant and terrifying. Gone was any trace of the man who'd shown her glimpses of tenderness. In his place stood the Scorpion, deadly, merciless. Before Violet could process what was happening, Marco was dragged into the room by two guards. The betrayer's face was already bloody. "Please, boss. I can explain." Dante moved with lethal grace, pulling a gun from his jacket. "You endangered what's mine." The gunshot echoed through the penthouse. Violet's scream caught in her throat as Marco's body crumpled to the floor. She pressed herself against the wall, trembling as Dante turned to her. Blood spattered his expensive suit, but his eyes, his eyes were focused entirely on her, possessive and intense. "This is my world, Violet," he said softly, dangerously. "And now it's yours, too." She should have been running, should have been horrified. Instead, she stood frozen, caught in the magnetic pull between them. The violence she'd just witnessed should have extinguished any attraction she felt. But somehow it burned hotter, darker, more consuming. Dante stepped closer, his bloodied hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Tell me you want to leave now." Violet couldn't speak, couldn't move, because the terrifying truth was she didn't want to leave. Not anymore. She was falling into his darkness, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dante's penthouse. But it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in Violet's bones. She paced the length of the living room, her fingers absently touching the bruise forming on her arm where Dante had gripped her during yesterday's chaos. The image of what he'd done to the traitor kept flashing through her mind. The cold calculation in his eyes, the efficient way he'd handled the threat it should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself drawn to his dangerous magnetism like a moth to a flame. The click of the front door made her freeze. Dante strode in, his presence immediately filling the space. His suit jacket was gone, and his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing corded forearms marked with fresh bruises. Their eyes met, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in his icy facade. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough. "Where else would I go?" Violet meant it to sound defiant, but it came out breathier than intended. Dante moved toward her with predatory grace, backing her against the wall. His hand came up to rest beside her head, caging her in. The scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, danger and desire wrapped into one intoxicating package. "You could have run," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "But you didn't." Before Violet could respond, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was brutal and possessive, tasting of coffee and something uniquely him. His free hand gripped her hip, pulling her closer, as if he could absorb her into himself. Despite every rational thought screaming at her to push him away, Violet's hands fisted in his shirt, drawing him nearer. When he finally pulled back, his dark eyes were storm-clouded with want. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs as reality came crashing back. This was Dante DeLuca, the Scorpion. The Dante, man who'd killed without hesitation just yesterday. She started, but her voice failed her. "Don't," he growled, pressing his forehead against hers. "Don't overthink this." But how could she not? Every rational part of her knew she should run. Yet here she was, caught between the wall and the most dangerous man she'd ever met, wanting nothing more than for him to kiss her again. Violet pushed against his chest, needing space to think. He allowed it, but his eyes never left her face, tracking every micro-expression like a predator studying its prey. "This is insane," she whispered more to herself than to him. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Welcome to my world, Piccola." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dante's penthouse, but it did nothing to warm the chill between them. Violet's lips still burned from last night's kiss, a ghost of sensation she couldn't shake. She watched Dante from across the kitchen counter, his broad shoulders tense as he answered emails on his phone, acting as if nothing had happened between them. "Get ready," he said without looking up. "I'm showing you something today." His voice held that familiar command that brooked no argument. Violet crossed her arms, hating how her body responded to his authority. "And if I refuse?" His dark eyes finally met hers, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "You won't." An hour later, they were in his sleek black Mercedes, gliding through the city's exclusive district. Violet's heart raced as they pulled up to a string of high-end establishments, restaurants, clubs, and boutiques that screamed luxury. "This is all yours?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Everything you see." Dante's hand rested on the small of her back as he guided her into the first venue, a clear signal of possession that made her skin tingle. My empire wasn't built on violence alone. Inside, everyone seemed to freeze when Dante entered. A man in an expensive suit approached, his face pale with nervous energy. "Mr. DeLuca," he stammered. "We weren't expecting—" "That's the point, Marco." Dante's voice was silk over steel. "How are the numbers?" Violet watched as Marco produced a tablet, his hands shaking slightly. One look from Dante had the man practically tripping over himself to explain financial reports. It was like watching a master conductor. Every person in the room moved to Dante's unspoken rhythm. They visited 3 more establishments, and the pattern repeated. Dante ruled with quiet authority, his presence alone enough to command absolute obedience. What struck Violet most wasn't the fear. He inspired it was the respect. His people looked to him like he was their salvation and their damnation wrapped in one dangerous package. Back at the penthouse, Violet's head spun with everything she'd witnessed. She moved to the window, staring out at the city that seemed so different now that she knew what lurked beneath its surface. "This is my world, Violet." Dante's voice came from behind her, closer than she expected. "If you're going to be in it, you need to understand the rules." She turned to face him, her breath catching at his proximity. "And what rules are those?" His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch so light it might have been her imagination. "Everything has a price. Everything belongs to someone." His eyes darkened. "And what's mine stays mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a thrill down her spine that she couldn't ignore. She was falling deeper into his world with every passing moment. And the scariest part was, she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The city lights flickered like distant stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Violet woke to an unusual silence, the kind that felt heavy with unspoken words. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw Dante's silhouette by the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. She hesitated, her bare feet silent against the cold marble floor as she approached him. Something about his posture made her chest tighten. Gone was the intimidating Mafia boss, replaced by a man who looked almost broken. "You should be sleeping," he said without turning, his voice rougher than usual. "So should you." Violet wrapped her arms around herself, keeping a careful distance between them. Dante took a long breath, his shoulders tight with tension. 15 years ago today, I watched my father die." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "He was executed by his own best friend, someone I called Uncle." The confession hung in the air between them. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs, surprised by this unexpected glimpse behind his walls. "I was 17, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Young enough to be naive, old enough to understand exactly what was happening. My mother, she didn't survive the grief. Dante." Violet stepped closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. "Everyone wants what I have now," he said, finally turning to face her. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, highlighting the shadows under his eyes. The power, the money, the respect. But nobody understands the cost. Every person who gets close is just waiting for their chance to strike. His words hit too close to home. Wasn't she doing the same thing, looking for her chance to escape? "Is that why you keep everyone at arm's length?" she asked softly. A bitter smile crossed his face. "Trust is a luxury I can't afford." His eyes met hers, intense and searching. "But you're different. You make me want things I shouldn't." Violet's breath caught in her throat. The vulnerability in his admission scared her more than his usual cold demeanor. She didn't know what to do with this version of him. This man who carried such deep wounds beneath his dangerous exterior. He turned back to the window, his jaw tight. "Go back to bed, Violet. Tomorrow, I need to be the monster everyone expects me to be." She stood there for a moment longer, watching him, her heart torn between sympathy and self-preservation. As she walked back to her room, his silhouette remained etched in her mind, powerful yet lonely, dangerous yet damaged. She was seeing too many layers of him now, and each one made it harder to remember why she needed to escape. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but sleep wouldn't come easily. Not with the knowledge that the man who held her captive was just as trapped as she was, only by different chains. The penthouse felt emptier than usual, with Dante gone. Violet wandered the halls, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. After days of being watched, the sudden freedom made her restless. She paused at a heavy wooden door she'd never seen opened before, her hand hovering over the brass handle. Just a peek, she thought, turning it slowly. The study beyond was everything she'd expect from someone like Dante: dark wood, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But what caught her eye wasn't the luxury. It was the wall covered in photographs and documents, connected by red strings like something out of a crime movie. Her throat went dry as she stepped closer. The photos showed men in suits, some with red X's drawn across their faces. Names and dates were scrawled beneath them in Dante's sharp handwriting. Some she recognized from news headlines about disappearances and suspicious deaths. Curious little thing, aren't you? Violet's heart stopped. She spun around to find Dante filling the doorway, his expression unreadable. He moved toward her with predatory grace, each step deliberate. "I was just..." she started, but the words died in her throat as he reached for her. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, firm enough to hold, but not quite hard enough to hurt. He pulled her closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the expensive cologne on his skin. "You want to understand my world?" His breath was hot against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "This is it. Every face on that wall is an enemy. Some are dead, others will be soon." His grip tightened, and Violet's pulse raced beneath his fingers. She should have been terrified, and part of her was. But there was something else too, a dark thrill that made her lean into him instead of pulling away. "Is that a threat?" she whispered. Dante's laugh was low and dangerous. "No, Bella, if I were threatening you." His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her bottom lip. "You'd know it." Violet stood frozen, caught between fear and desire, knowing she'd crossed a line but unable to regret it. In that moment, she realized there was no going back. She was already in too deep, drowning in the darkness of his world, and maybe, just maybe, she wanted to drown. The penthouse was eerily quiet that evening as Violet sat across from Dante at his elegant dining table. Warm candlelight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across his sharp features. For once, his phone wasn't buzzing with urgent messages from his men. No business to attend to, just them. The silence should have been uncomfortable, but something had shifted. Dante's usual icy demeanor had thawed slightly, and his dark eyes held a different kind of intensity when they met hers. "The food is good," Violet said, breaking the silence. Her voice came out softer than intended. "My chef trained in Italy." Dante took a sip of his wine, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Though I suspect you're not used to such formal dining arrangements." There was no mockery in his tone, just curiosity. It caught her off guard. "I prefer takeout and Netflix, if I'm being honest," she admitted with a small smile. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Netflix?" He seemed amused by the notion. "Don't tell me the great Dante DeLuca has never binge-watched a TV show." "I prefer books." He set down his glass. "Classical literature, mainly." Violet found herself leaning forward slightly. "Really? What's your favorite?" For a moment, she caught a glimpse of something else in his eyes. Not the calculated coldness of a mafia boss, but something warmer, almost vulnerable. "The Count of Monte Cristo," he said finally. "A story of revenge and redemption. And love," Violet added quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and the air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Dante stood suddenly, moving around the table until he was beside her chair. Violet's breath caught as he reached down, his fingers gentle as they brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered for just a moment, warm and surprisingly tender. But then, like a switch being flipped, his hand dropped and his expression hardened once more. He stepped back, rebuilding the walls she'd briefly seen behind. "It's getting late," he said curtly, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. "You should get some rest." But as Violet watched him stride from the room, she couldn't forget that brief moment of tenderness. It left her wondering what other sides of Dante DeLuca remained hidden beneath his dangerous exterior. That night, lying in bed, she realized something that terrified her more than his cold brutality ever had. She was starting to see the man beneath the monster, and that man was becoming harder to resist with each passing day. Violet woke to the sound of urgent voices and heavy footsteps. The usual stillness of Dante's penthouse had been replaced by a flurry of activity that made her stomach clench. Through the bedroom door, she could hear men speaking in hushed, serious tones. She slipped out of bed, pulled on her robe, and carefully opened the door. The sight that greeted her made her freeze. At least a dozen men in dark suits filled the living room, their weapons visible beneath their jackets. In the center of it all stood Dante, his broad shoulders tense as he issued rapid-fire orders. He noticed her immediately. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade away. Then his jaw tightened, and he gestured for her to join him. "Things have changed," he said, his voice low and controlled as she approached. The other men stepped back, creating a bubble of privacy around them. "The Rossi family is making their move. They've been watching the penthouse." Violet's throat went dry. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not safe." His hand came to rest on her lower back. The touch, both possessive and protective. "They know you're here. They'll use you to get to me if they can." "I should leave," Violet said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't an option. Dante's fingers tightened against her back. "You're not going anywhere. The only way I can protect you is if you stay close." His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. Very close. The implications of his words sent a shiver down her spine. Being close to Dante was like standing next to a live wire. Dangerous, electric, and impossible to ignore. "Your men can't protect me?" she asked, watching as more armed guards filed into the penthouse. Dante's laugh was cold. "My men are good, but they're not me." He turned to face her fully, his massive frame blocking out everything else. From now on, you don't leave my sight. Where I go, you go. When I sleep," his eyes darkened, "you sleep beside me." Violet's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to argue, to fight against this new level of control, but the gravity in his expression stopped her. This wasn't just about his possessiveness anymore. This was about survival. "How bad is it?" she whispered. "Bad enough that I'm taking precautions I've never had to take before." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare display of frustration. "The Rossis don't play games. They destroy everything in their path." A man approached them cautiously, holding out a phone to Dante. "Boss, they're ready." Dante nodded, his expression hardening back into the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss. He turned to Violet one last time. "Stay in my office until I'm done. Don't argue," he added when she opened her mouth to protest. "Not about this." As Violet watched him stride away, barking orders to his men, she realized she'd crossed a threshold. She wasn't just staying in Dante's world anymore. She was becoming part of it. The thought should have terrified her. But instead, she felt a strange mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. Whatever was coming, she was in it now. With him. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung open, and Violet's heart skipped a beat as she followed Dante inside. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Around an elegant table sat 5 of the most dangerous men in the city, their faces a mix of curiosity and contempt as they watched her enter. Dante's hand rested possessively on the small of her back as he guided her to a chair. His touch, firm but gentle, sent shivers down her spine. She couldn't help but notice how the other men's eyes followed their every move. "Gentlemen," Dante's voice cut through the silence, cold and commanding. "Let's discuss business." Violet sat quietly, trying to make herself invisible as they talked about territory disputes and profit margins. The casual way they discussed violence made her stomach turn. One man, Marco, kept throwing nervous glances at Dante while fidgeting with his wine glass. The meeting took a sharp turn when Marco's phone buzzed. Dante's eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Something you want to share with us, Marco?" Dante's voice was deadly quiet. Marco's face went pale. "No, boss. Just..." In one fluid motion, Dante was behind Marco's chair. He grabbed the phone, and Violet watched in horror as his expression darkened at whatever he saw on the screen. "So," Dante said, his voice eerily calm, "you've been feeding information to the Rossi family." What happened next was too fast for Violet to process. There was a blur of movement, the sound of a chair crashing, and suddenly Marco was on his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Dante stood over him, adjusting his cufflinks as if he hadn't just thrown a man to the ground. "I trusted you, Marco." Dante's words were soft, but carried clearly across the silent room. "That was your first mistake, making me trust you." Violet couldn't look away as Dante's men dragged Marco out. Her hands trembled in her lap, and she felt sick to her stomach. This was Dante's world, brutal, efficient, and completely merciless. When Dante returned to his seat, his face was a mask of cold indifference. But when his eyes met Violet's, something flickered in them. Concern, perhaps, or a hint of regret that she had to witness this side of him. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice softer than before. Violet nodded mechanically, but they both knew it was a lie. She just watched the man she was starting to care about turn into someone else entirely, someone dangerous and ruthless. And the scariest part wasn't that she was afraid of him, it was that some dark part of her understood why he had to be this way. The meeting continued as if nothing had happened. But Violet couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her bones. She was in too deep now, watching a side of Dante she couldn't unsee. And somehow, she wasn't running away. The penthouse felt like a gilded cage. Violet paced the length of the living room, her nerves still raw from witnessing Dante's brutality earlier that day. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but they offered no comfort. Her mind kept replaying the cold calculation in Dante's eyes as he dealt with the traitor, the way his hands had moved with practiced precision. She found him in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand as he stared out at the skyline. The moonlight cast shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the dangerous edge that seemed to radiate from him. "Why am I really here?" Violet's voice cut through the silence. "And don't feed me more lies about protection." Dante turned slowly, his dark eyes finding hers. "You should be in your room." "No." She stepped closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm tired of being shuffled around like one of your possessions. What do you want from me?" He set down his glass with deliberate care. "What I want," a bitter laugh escaped him. "What I want is to stop thinking about you, to focus on my empire without your face haunting every decision I make." The raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, he crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. His hand caught her waist, pulling her against him with enough force to make her gasp. "You want to know what I want?" His voice was rough, his breath hot against her ear. "I want to possess every inch of you, to mark you as mine so deeply that you'll never think of leaving." Without warning, his mouth claimed hers in a searing kiss. It wasn't gentle. It was all hunger and desperation, his fingers digging into her hips as he backed her against the wall. Violet's mind screamed at her to push him away, but her body betrayed her, melting into his touch, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire and something deeper, more dangerous. His thumb traced her lower lip, still tender from his kiss. "You belong to me now," he growled, the words sending shivers down her spine. "Fighting it will only make things harder for both of us." Violet's heart raced as she stared up at him, caught between fear and a desperate need for more. She knew in that moment that she'd crossed a line, one she could never uncross. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it sent a thrill of excitement through her veins. In the darkness of his world, she'd found something she never knew she was looking for. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dante's penthouse, but Violet couldn't shake the ghost of his kiss from her lips. She paced the living room, her fingers absently touching her mouth where his had been just hours before. The memory of his words echoed in her mind. "You belong to me now." Who did he think he was? She didn't belong to anyone. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. Dante emerged from his office, his dark suit impeccable as always. Their eyes met, and the air crackled with unspoken tension. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. Violet crossed her arms, like anyone could sleep in this prison. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He moved closer, and Violet fought the urge to step back. Even now, after everything, her body betrayed her, heart racing, skin tingling with awareness. "It's not a prison," he said softly, dangerously. "It's protection." "Is that what you tell yourself?" She lifted her chin. "Or is it just another way to control everything around you?" His eyes darkened. In 2 quick strides, he was in front of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "You think you know me?" His voice was low, almost a growl. "You don't know anything about my world." "I've seen enough," she shot back. "I've seen how you hurt people. How you—" His hand shot out, gripping her waist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make her gasp. "Yes," he said. "I hurt people. I kill people. That's who I am." His other hand came up to cup her face, the gentle touch at odds with his harsh words. "But not you. Never you." Violet's breath caught in her throat. This was the contradiction that haunted her. The man who could order deaths without blinking, yet touch her like she was made of glass. The man whose kiss had been both demanding and tender. "Why me?" she whispered. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or pain. But before he could answer, his phone buzzed, the moment shattered. He stepped back, his walls slamming back into place as he checked the message. "Business?" he said curtly, already turning away. "We'll talk later." Violet watched him go, her heart pounding. She was falling, she realized with a start, falling for a man who lived in shadows, who dealt in death. A man who could destroy her as easily as he could save her. And the scariest part? She wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The morning sun cast long shadows across the penthouse as Violet packed her overnight bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded a blouse, her mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming business trip. It was the first time she'd be leaving since becoming entangled in Dante's world. And the prospect filled her with equal parts relief and anxiety. "It's just 2 days," she muttered to herself, trying to quiet the uneasy flutter in her stomach. Dante had barely reacted when she'd told him about the trip the night before. His face a mask of indifference as he'd continued reviewing documents at his desk. His silence had stung more than she cared to admit. The sharp knock at her door made her jump. When she opened it, Dante filled the doorframe, his dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your car's here," he said, his voice low and controlled. But there was something else there, something that made her pulse quicken. "Keep your phone on, at all times." It wasn't a request. "I know how to take care of myself," Violet said, lifting her chin. "I did it for years before you came along." His jaw tightened. In 2 swift steps, he closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to grip her chin. "Things are different now," he growled softly. "You're mine to protect, whether you like it or not." The possessiveness in his touch sent shivers down her spine. She wanted to argue, to push back against his control, but the warmth of his hand and the concern hidden beneath his harsh words made her hesitate. Later, as the plane climbed through the clouds, Violet pressed her forehead against the cool window. She could still feel the ghost of Dante's touch on her skin, the memory of his intensity following her into the sky. 2 days away should have felt like freedom, a chance to breathe without his overwhelming presence. Instead, she felt untethered, as if something vital was missing. The realization terrified her more than any of Dante's threats ever had. Somewhere between his cold commands and rare moments of tenderness, she'd lost herself to him. The question was, how deep would she let herself fall? The call came at midnight. Violet's hands trembled as she clutched her phone. Her friend, Sarah's sister, crying on the other end. "She's gone, Violet. Sarah's just gone." The police found her apartment ransacked. Ice filled Violet's veins. Sarah was the only person she'd told about Dante, about the dangerous game she'd found herself caught in. The implications hit her like a physical blow. She packed her bags with shaking hands, catching the first flight back. During the journey, her mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. The luxury hotel suite that had felt like freedom now felt like a cage, keeping her from where she needed to be. When she arrived at her apartment, Dante was already there, standing in her darkened living room like a shadow made flesh. His presence filled the space, dark and dangerous. "You shouldn't have told anyone about us," he said, his voice deceptively soft. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where is Sarah?" "Your friend made a choice." Dante moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. She sold information about you, about us, to my enemies. No, Violet shook her head. She wouldn't. She did. He reached for her, his fingers grazing her cheek. The touch was gentle, but his eyes were hard. They offered her money. She took it. Tears burned in Violet's eyes. Is she? Alive, for now. Dante's jaw tightened. But she put you in danger. Nobody gets away with that. His words should have frightened her, but instead, they sent a shiver of something else down her spine. The way he said it, like a vow, like a promise, made her realize just how deep she'd fallen into his world. What happens now? She whispered. Dante's hand slid to the back of her neck, firm and possessive. Now you understand that you're mine to protect, and anyone who threatens what's mine pays the price. In that moment, Violet saw the truth of her situation with crystal clarity. She wasn't just caught in Dante's world anymore, she was part of it, and there was no going back. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, accepting the darkness that came with his protection, with his possession. Trust me, he murmured against her hair. And despite everything, she did. Because in this world of shadows and betrayal, he was her only certainty. Violet paced the length of Dante's penthouse living room, her heels clicking against the marble floors, in a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The betrayal of her friend hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of expensive leather and subtle hints of gunpowder that seemed to follow Dante wherever he went. She could feel his eyes on her, always watching, always calculating. He sat in his leather armchair like it was a throne, one hand holding a glass of whiskey, the other resting casually on the arm of the chair. But there was nothing casual about the way he tracked her movement. If you keep pacing like that, you'll wear a hole in my floor, he said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that made her skin prickle. Violet stopped and turned to face him. Maybe I wouldn't pace if I wasn't being held prisoner in your gilded cage. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something darker. You're not a prisoner, Violet. You're under my protection. Is there a difference? Dante set his glass down and stood in one fluid motion. He moved toward her with the grace of a predator, each step measured and purposeful. Violet's breath caught in her throat, but she stood her ground. The difference, he said, closing the distance between them, is that prisoners don't occupy my thoughts the way you do. His hand came up to brush her cheek, and Violet hated how her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch before she could stop herself. His fingers were warm against her skin, calloused from years of violence, yet somehow gentle when they touched her. Don't, she whispered, pulling away. You can't just touch me and expect everything to be okay. My friend is missing because of your world, because of you. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Your friend is missing because someone thought they could use you to get to me. His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. They'll learn their mistake soon enough. Violet tried to step back, but found herself trapped between his body and the wall. And what about my mistake? Getting involved with you? That wasn't a mistake, he growled, bracing one hand against the wall beside her head. That was fate. The air between them crackled with tension. Violet could feel the heat radiating off his body, smell his expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. It would be so easy to give in, to let him consume her completely. Instead, she ducked under his arm, putting distance between them. I need to be alone, she said, her voice shaking slightly. You know I can't let you leave. I'm not asking to leave. I'm asking for space in this beautiful prison you've built for me. Dante watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally, He nodded once. "You can have the library, but my men stay outside the door." Violet didn't wait for him to change his mind. She hurried toward the library, feeling his gaze burning into her back with every step. Even as she closed the heavy wooden door behind her, she knew there was no real escape. Not from him, not from the way he made her feel, and not from the dangerous world she'd stumbled into with one impulsive prank at a bar. The black SUV rolled to a stop outside an abandoned warehouse. Violet's heart pounded against her ribs as she watched Dante adjust his suit jacket, his movements precise and controlled. He'd insisted she come along to this meeting, claiming it was safer to keep her close. But nothing felt safe about this. "Stay in the car," Dante ordered, his voice carrying that edge that brooked no argument. "Marco will guard you." Violet crossed her arms. "I'm not a child who needs—" His hand shot out, gripping her chin. "This isn't a game, Kara. These men would kill you without hesitation just to get to me." The heat of his fingers against her skin made her breath catch. Even now, after everything she'd seen, her body betrayed her when he touched her. Through the tinted windows, she watched as Dante strode toward the warehouse entrance, flanked by his men. His presence commanded attention back straight. Shoulders set, every step calculated. This wasn't the man who sometimes looked at her with softness in his eyes. This was the Scorpion, the Mafia boss who ruled through fear and blood. The meeting didn't last long. Raised voices echoed across the empty lot, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Violet flinched, her nails digging into her palms. When Dante emerged, there was blood on his knuckles, but his expression remained eerily calm. He slid into the car beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with gunpowder. His dark eyes found hers in the dim light. "You don't know how dangerous this world is," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. His bloodied hand reached for her face, and she didn't pull away. "Stay with me, and I'll protect you." The words settled heavy in her chest. She wanted to refuse, to run from this darkness he represented. But as his thumb traced her lower lip, she knew she was already too deep. His world had become hers, whether she wanted it or not. "Dante," she whispered, but he silenced her with a look that made her body tremble. "There's no going back now, Violet. You're mine to protect, mine to keep safe." His words carried the weight of a promise, or perhaps a threat. With Dante, the line between the two was always blurred. As the car pulled away from the warehouse, Violet stared out the window, trying to ignore how her skin burned where he touched her. She was falling deeper into his web of danger and desire. And the scariest part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. The penthouse felt smaller than ever as Violet paced across the marble floors, her heels clicking against the cold surface. Dante's declaration that she would be staying here for protection still rang in her ears. His words had been firm, leaving no room for argument, but his eyes had held something else, a possessiveness that made her breath catch. "This isn't necessary," she said, turning to face him. "I can take care of myself." Dante stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his powerful frame. The city lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw. "You don't get to make that decision anymore, Violet." Her heart raced at the way he said her name, like a caress and a warning wrapped into one. She watched as he loosened his tie, the simple action drawing her attention to the strong column of his throat. "Why are you really keeping me here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He moved toward her then, each step deliberate and predatory. "You know why." The space between them crackled with tension. Violet could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the expensive cologne that clung to his skin. Her breathing quickened as he reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Stop fighting this," he murmured, his voice rough with desire. Before she could respond, his lips claimed hers in a kiss that stole her breath. It wasn't gentle. Nothing about Dante was gentle, but there was a tenderness beneath the possession that made her knees weak. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer until she could feel the thundering of his heart against her chest. Just as she melted into him, surrendering to the heat building between them, his phone rang. The harsh sound cut through the moment like a blade. Dante pulled back, his eyes dark with frustrated desire. He answered the call with a sharp, "What?" while keeping one hand firmly on Violet's waist, as if afraid she'd disappear if he let go completely. Violet watched his expression harden as he listened to whatever news was being delivered. The tender moment was gone, replaced by the cold reality of who he was. A dangerous man in an even more dangerous world. And she was falling deeper into both with every passing second. The morning sun cast long shadows across the penthouse's marble floors as Violet paced, her mind replaying the kiss for the 100th time. 4 days had passed, and Dante had barely looked at her, much less spoken about what happened between them. When their paths crossed, he was all business, cold, distant, and focused on his empire. She caught his reflection in the window, watching him bark orders into his phone, while his men shuffled papers across his desk. His jaw was set in that familiar hard line, his dark eyes focused on something she couldn't see. Even from across the room, his presence was suffocating. "Get them here, now." Dante's voice cut through the air like steel. He ended the call and turned to his right-hand man, Marco. "Someone's been talking to the Rosses." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Violet's stomach clenched as she watched Dante's men exchange worried glances. She'd learned enough about the Mafia world to know that betrayal meant death. Within an hour, 2 men were dragged into Dante's office. Violet tried to leave, but Dante's voice stopped her. "Stay." It wasn't a request. What happened next would haunt her forever. Dante didn't raise his voice or make a show of violence. Instead, he moved with calculated precision, each blow designed to extract information. When the first man broke, confessing to selling information to their rivals, Dante's expression never changed. "You know what happens to traitors," he said, his voice eerily calm. Violet turned away, but she couldn't block out the sounds. When silence finally fell, she forced herself to look. Dante stood over the unconscious men, adjusting his cufflinks as if he'd just finished a business meeting. There wasn't a single drop of blood on his pristine suit. His eyes met hers across the room, and for a moment she saw something flicker in them, concern, perhaps, or regret that she had witnessed this side of him. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Take them away," he ordered his men, never breaking eye contact with Violet. "Make sure they understand the cost of betrayal." Later, alone in her room, Violet's hands shook as she poured herself a drink. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape. Instead, she found herself remembering the gentleness of his kiss, the way his hands had held her face like she was something precious. The contradiction made her head spin. How could the same man who dealt out death so casually make her feel so safe? She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the city lights blur below. "This is who I am." Dante's voice came from behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him enter. "If you can't handle it." "I can handle it," she interrupted, surprising them both with the steadiness in her voice. She turned to face him, noting the dangerous gleam in his eyes. "I just don't understand why you—" "Let me see it." He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "Because you need to know exactly what you're getting into." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek. "There's no going back now, Violet. You're in my world." She should have pulled away. Instead, She leaned into his touch, knowing she was sealing her fate. The darkness in him should have sent her running, but it drew her in like a moth to flame. She was falling, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The penthouse felt like a prison tonight. Violet paced the length of Dante's study, her nerves frayed from everything she'd witnessed. The memory of his cold efficiency in dealing with traitors was still fresh in her mind. The calculated violence, the unwavering resolve. When she heard his footsteps approaching, her heart jumped into her throat. Dante entered the room like a storm cloud, his presence filling every corner. His suit jacket was gone, leaving him in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There was still a dangerous energy radiating from him, left over from the day's events. "You can't keep avoiding this conversation," Violet said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His jaw tightened. "There's nothing to discuss." "Nothing to discuss?" Her voice rose. "I watched you nearly kill a man today, Dante. Like it was nothing. Like it was just another business meeting." "That's exactly what it was." His voice was cold, controlled. "This is my world, Violet. The sooner you understand that, the better." She crossed her arms, trying to hide how her hands were shaking. "Your world? Is that what I am now? Just another piece in your game?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. He moved closer, each step deliberate. "You think I'm playing games? Aren't you?" Violet stood her ground, even as her pulse raced. "Keeping me here, controlling my every move. I'm just another asset to protect, right?" Dante's hand shot out, gripping her arm. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind her of his strength. "You have no idea what I'm protecting you from." "Then tell me." She yanked her arm free. "Stop treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth." His laugh was bitter. "The truth? The truth is that the moment you pulled that little prank at the bar, you stepped into a world you can't begin to understand. Every person I've ever cared about has been used against me, every weakness exploited." The raw emotion in his voice made her pause. "Is that what I am? A weakness?" Dante moved suddenly, backing her against the wall, his hands planted on either side of her head, caging her in. The heat from his body was overwhelming, his face inches from hers. "You're mine," he growled, his voice rough with possession. "That's what you are, whether you like it or not, whether you understand it or not." Violet lifted her chin, meeting his intensity with her own. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, she wouldn't back down. "No, Dante, I'm not. You don't own me." The tension between them crackled like electricity. His eyes dropped to her lips, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pushed away from the wall, leaving her breathless. "We'll see about that," he said quietly, the threat and promise mingling in his words. Violet watched him walk away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, the heat of his body. Despite her defiance, a part of her knew he was right. She was already his, whether she admitted it or not. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, but Violet felt nothing of its warmth. Her mind kept replaying last night's fight with Dante, his fierce words echoing in her head. "You're mine." She paced the living room, her bare feet silent against the cold marble floor. The sound of a door opening made her freeze. Dante emerged from his office, his dark suit perfectly pressed, despite the early hour. Their eyes met across the room, and the air crackled with unspoken tension. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "No." Violet crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. "Did you?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "No." He moved closer, and Violet's heart picked up speed. Even after their fight, her body betrayed her with its reaction to his presence. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. We need to talk, he said. About what? How you think you own me? Violet's voice shook slightly. Or about how you keep pulling me deeper into your world without giving me a choice? Dante's dark eyes flashed. You think I had a choice? His words came out harsh, almost desperate. You think I wanted to feel this way about you? Violet's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? He ran a hand through his hair, a rare show of frustration. I'm saying that keeping you here stopped being about business a long time ago. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. I'm falling for you, Violet, and it's destroying everything I thought I knew about control. The confession hit her like a physical blow. She took a step back, her legs hitting the edge of the couch. You can't. I can't. What? He moved closer, trapping her between his body and the furniture. Can't feel? Can't want you? It's too late for that. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. See the conflict in his eyes. This was Dante DeLuca, the ruthless mafia boss, who killed without hesitation, admitting he had feelings for her. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her walls crumbling. Your world, it terrifies me. You think it doesn't terrify me? His hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. Feeling this way about anyone is dangerous in my world. But I can't stop it, not with you. Violet closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the vulnerability in his voice. When she opened them, again she saw something raw and honest in his gaze, something that made her own carefully constructed defenses start to crack. She pulled away from his touch, needing space to think. I need time, Dante. It's too much. He let his hand fall, but didn't step back. Take your time, he said, his voice low and intense. But remember this. I don't just want to own you anymore, Violet. I want to protect you, to keep you, to make you mine in every way that matters. With those words hanging in the air between them, he turned and walked away, leaving Violet trembling with the weight of his confession and the terrifying realization that despite everything, despite who he was and what he'd done, she might be falling for him too. The air in the penthouse was thick with tension. Violet paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker below like distant stars. Her reflection ghosted across the glass a shadow of the woman she'd been just weeks ago, before Dante DeLuca had turned her world upside down. The sound of hurried footsteps and hushed voices echoed from the hallway. Another emergency meeting, another threat. The walls of her gilded cage seemed to close in a little more each day. Dante burst through the door, his dark suit immaculate despite the late hour. His face was carved from stone, jaw clenched tight enough to crack. Behind him, two of his men waited in the doorway, their expressions grim. There's been an attack at one of our warehouses, he said, his voice low and controlled. But Violet had learned to read the subtle signs of his anger, the slight twitch in his left eye, the way his fingers curled into loose fists at his sides. How bad? She asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Dante's dark eyes fixed on her, searching her face. Bad enough. The Rossi family is making their move. They think they can force my hand by destroying my business piece by piece. What are you going to do? What I have. Two. He turned to his men. Get everyone in position. We move tonight. The men nodded and disappeared, leaving Violet alone with Dante. The space between them crackled with unspoken tension. You should stay in your room tonight, he said, already turning away. Lorenzo will be outside your door. No. The word left her mouth before she could stop it. Dante froze, slowly turning back to face her. What did you say? Violet lifted her chin, heart hammering against her ribs. I said no. I'm not hiding in my room while you go out there and risk everything. I'm already part of this, whether you like it or not." He moved toward her with predatory grace, backing her against the window. His hand came up to grip her jaw, not quite gentle but not hurting either. "You have no idea what you're asking for, Kara. This isn't a game." "I know exactly what this is," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And I'm not backing down. Not anymore." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, respect, maybe even fear. His thumb brushed across her bottom lip, the gesture at odds with the violence she knew his hands were capable of. "If you stay," he said, his voice rough, "there's no going back. You'll be choosing this life, choosing me with everything that comes with it." Violet reached up, wrapping her fingers around his wrist. She could feel his pulse racing beneath her touch. "I made my choice the moment I asked a stranger to hug me in that bar." For a long moment, Dante just stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Then he nodded. Once, sharp and decisive. "Get changed," he said, stepping back. "Wear something dark. We leave in 20 minutes." As he strode toward the door, Violet called after him. "Dante?" He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "I'm with you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, dangerous and beautiful all at once. "I know, Kara. That's what scares me." The morning light filtered through the broad fiber-scryed penthouse windows, but it brought no warmth to Violet's heart. Her hands trembled as she read through the messages on her phone, messages that confirmed her worst fears. Sarah, her friend of 5 years, had been feeding information to Dante's rivals for weeks. Every casual conversation, every concerned text asking about her whereabouts, it had all been a carefully orchestrated betrayal. The realization made her stomach turn. "When were you going to tell me?" Violet's voice cracked as she confronted Dante in his study. He sat behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable. "When I had confirmation," he replied, his voice steady and cold. "I needed to be certain. And now, it's being handled." The finality in his tone sent a chill down her spine. Violet wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. "Handled? Like everything else in your world? With violence and blood?" Dante stood slowly, his movements deliberate as he walked around the desk. "This is what protection looks like in my world, Violet. It's not pretty, but it's necessary." "Protection?" She laughed bitterly. "Or control? How long have you known? How many of my conversations have you monitored? How many of my friends have you investigated?" He moved closer, and despite her anger, her body responded to his proximity. "All of them," he admitted without shame. "Because that's what it takes to keep you safe." "Safe?" Violet stepped back, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "Do you think I don't see it? All the lies, the manipulation?" Dante's expression hardened. "This is the life I've chosen, Violet," he said coldly. "And you're in it now, whether you like it or not." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She was in too deep. Every person she trusted could be a potential threat, every friendship a possible betrayal. And Dante, he was both her protector and her jailer. She turned away from him, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. "I never asked for any of this. None of us do," he replied, his voice softening slightly. "But here we are." The silence that followed was deafening. Violet could feel the walls of her old life crumbling around her, replaced by the harsh reality of Dante's world. A world of shadows, secrets, and unspoken threats. And somewhere in the midst of it all, she had lost herself to him, to this dangerous game they were playing. There was no going back now. She was marked by his world, changed by it. And as she stood there, feeling the heat of his presence behind her, she realized that maybe she didn't want to go back at all. The penthouse was silent, except for the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. Violet stood near the glass, watching the city lights blur through the water-streaked panes. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, conflicted, but somehow different from the woman who'd played that silly prank in the bar weeks ago. She heard Dante's footsteps before she saw him, steady and purposeful. Her heart quickened, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. Not when every look they shared lately felt like playing with fire. "You should be sleeping," he said, his voice low and rough. Violet closed her eyes, fighting the shiver that ran through her at the sound. "I can't." He moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Why not?" She turned then. A mistake she realized too late. Dante stood closer than she'd expected, his dark eyes intense in the dim light. He'd loosened his tie, and the top buttons of his shirt were undone, a rare glimpse of the man beneath the perfectly controlled exterior. "You know why?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Say it." The tension between them crackled like electricity before a storm. Violet's breath caught in her throat as Dante took another step forward, backing her against the cold glass. "I can't stop thinking about you," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Even after everything, the violence, the danger, the lies, I still..." Dante's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her bottom lip. The gentleness of the touch contrasted sharply with the predatory look in his eyes. "Still what?" His voice was barely more than a growl. Instead of answering, Violet reached up and pulled him down to her. Their lips met in a crash of pent-up desire and need. Dante's control snapped instantly. He pressed her harder against the window, one hand tangling in her hair while the other gripped her hip possessively. The kiss was nothing like their previous ones. This was raw, desperate, full of all the words they couldn't say. Violet's fingers dug into his shoulders as his mouth moved to her neck, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "You're mine." He breathed against her skin. "Say it." "Dante," she gasped as his teeth grazed her pulse point. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, and what Violet saw there made her heart stop. Behind the darkness, behind the power and control, there was something else, something vulnerable and real. "Say it," he demanded again, softer this time. Violet's hands came up to frame his face. "I'm yours," she whispered, and watched as something in his expression broke open. This time when he kissed her, it was different, still passionate, but touched with a tenderness that made her chest ache. His hands moved over her body like he was memorizing every curve, every breath, every small sound she made. As they lost themselves in each other, Violet knew there was no going back. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, fallen for a man she shouldn't want. But in that moment, with Dante's hands on her skin and his heart beating against hers, she couldn't bring herself to care. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the last of her resistance, the last of her doubts. Tomorrow, she'd have to face what this meant for both of them. But tonight, she'd let herself fall. The morning light barely touched the Glording's penthouse windows when Violet woke to the sound of hurried footsteps and harsh whispers. Something was wrong. The air felt thick with tension, and the usual quiet of Dante's domain had been replaced by an unsettling buzz of activity. She pulled on a silk robe and stepped into the hallway. Dante's men moved with urgent purpose, their faces grim. In the center of it all stood Dante himself, his broad shoulders rigid with fury as he barked orders into his phone. "I want him found, now." His voice was deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. When he turned and saw her, his dark eyes flickered with something that might have been concern before hardening again. Marco turned. The words fell like stones between them. He's been feeding information to the Rossi family for months. Violet's stomach dropped. Marco had been one of Dante's most trusted men, the one who'd always given her small, reassuring smiles when she'd felt lost in this world of violence and power. He'd been the one who'd convinced her she could trust Dante, that staying here was for her own protection. Everything, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Everything that's happened? It was all part of their plan? Dante's jaw clenched. "Get back inside," he ordered, already turning away. "I'll handle this." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected, making him pause. "I'm done being pushed aside, Dante. I deserve to know why my life has been turned upside down." He moved so fast she barely had time to breathe. His hands gripped her arms, not quite hurting but promising that he could. "You want to know why?" His breath was hot against her face. "Because I'm always at war, with my enemies, with myself." His grip tightened. "With what I feel for you." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications. Violet's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't back down. "Then let me fight with you. This isn't your war. It became my war the moment you brought me into your world." She met his gaze steadily. Or was that just another lie? Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her or kill someone. Instead, he released her abruptly and stepped back. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice cold again. "I have business to attend to." Violet watched him go, surrounded by his men, disappearing into the violent world he commanded. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling more alone than ever. There was no escape now. She was completely entangled in Dante's web of power and betrayal. And deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. The night air crackled with tension as Violet watched from the penthouse window. Below, black SUVs lined the street, Dante's men moving with military precision. Her stomach twisted as she realized what was about to unfold. Dante stood behind her, his presence both threatening and reassuring. He was dressed entirely in black, his usual expensive suit replaced by tactical gear. "You don't have to watch this," he said, his voice low and controlled. But she couldn't look away. The raid began with synchronized efficiency, Dante's men breaching multiple locations simultaneously. Even from this distance, she could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire and breaking glass. This was his world, in its rawest form, stripped of any pretense of civility. Hours passed like this, with Violet bearing witness to the systematic dismantling of Dante's enemies. When he finally returned to the penthouse, his hands were clean but his eyes were dark with violence. "It had to be done," he said, noticing her pale face. Violet wrapped her arms around herself. "Did it?" Something in her voice made him pause. He crossed the room to her, his movements predatory yet hesitant. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his features. "You think I want this?" His voice was rough. "Everything I've built. It's all a target now. They're coming for what's mine." His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. "And you're the biggest liability of all." Violet's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "They know." His jaw clenched. "They know you're my weakness. That's why this war started. Because I let someone get close enough to matter." The confession hung heavy between them. Violet's heart hammered in her chest as Dante moved closer, backing her against the window. His body caged her in, not threatening but protective. "I can't let you go," he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. "I won't." Violet closed her eyes, feeling the war within herself. Everything in her screamed to run to escape this dangerous world. But something stronger kept her rooted to the spot, the undeniable pull between them, the way her body recognized his proximity as both danger and sanctuary. "Then don't," she whispered back, her decision made. She reached up, touching his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." Dante's eyes darkened with possession and something deeper, vulnerability, need, maybe even love. He crushed her to him, his kiss desperate and claiming. Violet surrendered to it, knowing she was sealing her fate. She was no longer just living in his world. She was becoming part of it. As the city burned below them, Violet understood there was no going back. She had fallen for the monster, and now she would have to learn to survive in his darkness. The night air crackled with tension as Violet paced in Dante's penthouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder of how far she'd fallen into his dark world. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor to ceiling windows, deceptively peaceful against the storm that was about to break. Her phone buzzed. The message made her blood run cold. "We have your sister. Come alone, or she dies." Attached was a photo of her sister bound to a chair, fear evident in her wide eyes. Violet's hands trembled as she stared at the pasting screen. She knew she should tell Dante, but the thought of what he would do, the violence he would unleash, made her hesitate. The choice was taken from her when the penthouse door opened. Dante strode in, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. One look at her face, and his expression hardened. "What happened?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. Violet swallowed hard. "They have my sister." Dante's eyes went cold, that familiar mask of the ruthless Mafia boss sliding into place. He moved toward her with predatory grace, taking her phone and scanning the message. "You were going to go alone." It wasn't a question. He knew her too well now. "I can't let you hurt anyone else because of me," Violet whispered, her voice breaking. "This has to end." "No." His hand gripped her arm, firm, but not painful. "You don't get to make that choice. You're mine to protect." Violet jerked away from him, anger flaring. "I'm not your possession, Dante. This is my sister, my family. Your world, your violence, it's destroying everything I care about." Something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps or understanding, but his resolve didn't waver. If they touch you, they die. That's not negotiable. As he turned to make calls, arranging his men for what would undoubtedly be a bloody confrontation, Violet felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She watched him, this man who'd upended her life, who showed her both the darkest shadows and the most intense passion she'd ever known. She waited until he was distracted, then slipped out quietly. She couldn't let anyone else suffer for the choices she'd made. As she stepped into the elevator, she whispered a silent prayer that Dante would forgive her and that she would survive what was to come. What she didn't know was that Dante had already anticipated her move. As she emerged from the building, his men were watching, waiting. The game was far from over, and the night was about to become very, very dangerous. The sound of gunfire shattered the night air as Dante's men stormed the warehouse. Blood pounded in Violet's ears as she watched from behind a steel column, her wrists still raw from where they'd bound her. The air was thick with gunpowder and fear, but it was Dante who commanded her attention. He moved like a predator through the chaos, each step calculated and lethal. His expensive suit was spattered with crimson, his eyes cold as winter frost, as he systematically eliminated every threat in his path. This wasn't the man who'd shown her glimpses of tenderness in quiet moments. This was the scorpion, the ruthless mafia boss who'd earned his reputation through blood and violence. "Where is he?" Dante's voice cut through the mayhem, deadly calm. His gun remained steady in his grip as he approached the man who'd orchestrated Violet's kidnapping. The betrayer, Marco, stumbled backward, terror evident in his eyes. "Boss, please, I can explain." "You touched what's mine." Dante's words were ice, promising retribution. "There is no explanation for that." Violet's breath caught in her throat as Dante closed the distance. She should have been horrified, should have wanted to look away, but she couldn't tear her gaze from him, this dangerous man who'd turned her world upside down, who'd awakened something dark and thrilling inside her. The shot rang out, clean and precise. Marco crumpled to the ground without another word. In the sudden silence that followed, Dante turned to her. Blood streaked his face, but his eyes held something different when they met hers. A flash of vulnerability, of fear that she'd run from the monster he truly was. Instead, Violet stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for him. "I'm still here," she whispered. His fingers intertwined with hers, gripped tight enough to hurt. Around them, his empire lay secure in blood and bullet casings. But in that moment, all that mattered was the way he pulled her close, as if she was the only thing keeping him human. The warehouse reeked of gunpowder and death, but Violet knew she'd made her choice. This was his world, violent, dangerous, and unforgiving. And somehow, impossibly, it had become hers too. The penthouse was eerily quiet when Dante returned. Blood stained his white shirt, and exhaustion lined his face as he stepped into the dimly lit living room. Violet stood by the window, her silhouette outlined against the city lights. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes meeting his across the space between them. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick with unspoken words and raw emotion. "It's done," Dante said, his voice rough. He loosened his tie, letting it hang loose around his neck. "They won't threaten you again." Violet took a hesitant step toward him. "Are you hurt?" "No." His eyes never left her face, drinking in every detail as if memorizing her features. "The blood isn't mine." She nodded, understanding the weight of what he'd done, what he'd always do, to protect her. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it filled her with a strange sense of peace. Dante closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who just unleashed such violence. "I thought I'd lose you today," he admitted, his mask of control finally cracking. "I can't lose you, Violet. You're mine, always. I'll never let anyone take you from me." The raw emotion in his voice made her breath catch. This was Dante De Luca, the feared mafia boss, the man who ruled through violence and intimidation, laying his heart bare before her. "I know," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "I'm yours, Dante. Despite everything, maybe because of everything, I'm yours." He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with desperate possessiveness. She could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, matching the wild rhythm of her own. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, the words seeming to surprise even him. "God help me, but I love you." Violet lifted her face to his, seeing the vulnerability in his dark eyes. This was the real Dante, not the cold-blooded mafia boss, but the man who'd fought his way through hell to keep her safe. She reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with trembling fingers. "I love you too," she whispered, and felt him shudder against her. "All of you, even the darkness." His mouth claimed hers in a kiss that was both tender and desperate, as if he needed to prove to himself that she was real, that she was truly his. In that moment, surrounded by his warmth and strength, Violet knew she'd made her choice. Their love might have been born in darkness, forged through violence and pain, but it was real. It was everything they both needed to survive. And she wouldn't have it any other way. Following the violent confrontation, morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Violet sat on the leather couch, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, while Dante stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense as he surveyed the city below. The silence between them was different now, no longer charged with danger and uncertainty, but heavy with everything they'd been through together. Violet watched him, noting how even in this moment of peace he remained vigilant, protective. "You haven't slept," she said softly, breaking the silence. Dante turned to face her, his dark eyes softening as they met hers. "Neither have you." He crossed the room and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. For a man who dealt in violence, his presence now brought her comfort rather than fear. "I keep thinking about everything," Violet admitted, setting her coffee down. "How one silly prank at a bar led to." She gestured vaguely at the space between them. A ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips. "You changed everything that night," he said, his voice low and rough. "Walked right into my world without knowing who I was. Would you have let me walk away if I'd tried?" "No." His answer was immediate, definitive. "From the moment you asked me to hug you, you were mine. I just didn't understand what that meant yet." Violet turned to face him fully. "And now?" "Now?" Dante reached out, his fingers tracing her jawline with unexpected gentleness. "Now I know that having power means nothing if I can't protect what matters most." The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. This was the real Dante, not the ruthless Mafia boss, but the man who'd fought so hard to keep her safe, to keep her close. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Not of you, not of this world." "You should be," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "This life, my life, it will never be simple." "I don't want simple," Violet replied, her hand finding his. "I want you, all of you, Dante, the darkness and the light." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Then you have me entirely. But know this, I'll never stop being what I am, a monster to everyone else, but yours completely." In that moment, as the morning light wrapped around them, Violet understood that their love story would never be conventional. It was born in darkness, forged through violence, but it had emerged stronger for it. She was no longer just the woman who'd pranked a stranger in a bar. She was his equal, his partner, his salvation. And as Dante's lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of possession and protection, of passion and promise, she knew that this was their beginning. The world outside might be dangerous and dark, but together they'd created their own kind of light. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Violet stood at the window, her fingers pressed against the cool glass as she watched the city below come to life. Everything looked so normal from up here, people rushing to work, cars honking in traffic, life continuing as if the violent storm of the past few weeks had never happened. But it had happened. The weight of that reality sat heavy in her chest. Behind her, she heard Dante's familiar footsteps. He moved like a predator, silent but impossible to ignore. His presence filled the room, making her skin prickle with awareness. "You're thinking too hard," he said, his voice low and knowing. Violet turned to face him. He stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, every inch the powerful Mafia boss she'd come to know. But there was something different in his eyes now, a softness that appeared only when he looked at her. "I'm trying to figure out where I fit in all of this," she admitted. "Your world, It's not exactly what I imagined for myself. Dante crossed the room in 3 long strides, closing the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone capable of such violence. "My world isn't safe," he acknowledged, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "I won't lie to you about that, but you've already survived the worst of it." Violet leaned into his touch, even as doubt gnawed at her. "And what happens next time, when another enemy comes for you? For us. Then we face it together." His dark eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "I can't promise you safety in my world, but I can promise you I'll never let you go. You're mine now, Violet. That's not going to change." Her heart thundered in her chest. This was the moment, the choice she'd been avoiding since that first night when she'd playfully asked a stranger for a hug. Stay and accept this dangerous life with him, or run and never look back. Violet reached up, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. This man had turned her world upside down, had shown her both the darkest and most passionate sides of life. He was dangerous, possessive, and sometimes cruel to his enemies. But with her, he was something else entirely. "I choose you," she whispered, the words falling from her lips like a confession. "All of you, the good and the bad. I know what I'm getting into now." Dante's grip tightened, and something fierce flashed in his eyes. He pulled her against him, his kiss hard and demanding, claiming her choice as his victory. When he finally pulled back, his breath was ragged against her lips. "You're mine," he growled softly. "Forever." Violet nodded, knowing that this decision would change everything. But as Dante held her close, his heart beating strong and steady against her chest, she knew it was right. In his dangerous world, she'd found something real, something worth fighting for. She was choosing love over fear, passion over safety. And somehow, in the arms of the most dangerous man she'd ever known, she felt more alive than ever before. The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds, casting a soft glow through the penthouse windows. Violet stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass, her reflection ghosting against the darkened sky. Behind her, Dante moved with his characteristic quiet grace, pouring 2 glasses of wine. 6 months had passed since the final confrontation. 6 months of rebuilding, of learning to trust, of finding their way forward together. The world outside was still dangerous, but within these walls they'd found their peace. "You're thinking too hard again," Dante said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of authority and warmth that never failed to send a shiver down her spine. He approached, offering her a glass of deep red wine. Violet accepted it with a small smile, just reflecting on how much has changed. She turned to face him, taking in his sharp features, the way his dark eyes seemed to soften when they met hers. "Did you ever think we'd end up here? When I first asked you to pretend to hug me that night?" A ghost of a blank smile played at the corners of his mouth. "No one makes me do anything I don't want to do, Tesoro." He stepped closer, his free hand finding the small of her back. Even then, the warmth of his touch spread through her body, familiar now but no less electrifying. "The great Dante De Luca? Admitting he wanted to hug me?" She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "Should I be worried about your reputation?" "My reputation?" His voice dropped lower, dangerous and seductive, all at once. "I think having the most beautiful, cunning woman in the city by my side only enhances it." Violet leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his chest against her. "Cunning, am I? You survived my world," he said simply. "You thrived in it, made it better." His fingers traced up her spine, making her shiver. "Made me better." They stood in comfortable silence, looking out over their empire. The fear that had once defined their relationship had transformed into something else. Trust, understanding, a shared power that made them both stronger. "The Carmelos want to meet tomorrow," Violet said after a while, all business now. "They're nervous about the new territory arrangements." Dante's hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Let them be nervous." His voice held that edge of steel that reminded everyone why he was feared, as long as they remember who's in charge. "We're in charge," Violet corrected him, meeting his gaze steadily. His eyes darkened with approval and something more primal. "We are?" he agreed, setting down his wine glass to cup her face. "And anyone who forgets that will regret it." Violet smiled, knowing the truth of his words. They'd built this together, this empire, this life, this love. It wasn't perfect, wasn't always safe, but it was theirs. And they would protect it with everything they had. Dante's lips found hers in a kiss that still held all the passion of their first, but now carried something deeper: trust, commitment, understanding. When they pulled apart, Violet saw in his eyes everything he rarely said aloud: love, devotion, promise. "Together?" she whispered against his lips. "Always," he replied. And in that single word was every promise he'd ever made her, every fight they'd won, every obstacle they'd overcome. The city stretched out before them, their kingdom, their battlefield, their home. But in this moment, they were just Violet and Dante, two people who'd found love in the darkest of places and built something beautiful from it. The night wrapped around them like a cloak, and they stood there, united, ready to face whatever came next. Because they both knew that, together, they were unstoppable. The city lights twinkled below Dante's penthouse, casting a soft glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Violet stood at the glass, her reflection ghosting against the darkened sky. So much had changed since that night at the bar when she'd playfully asked a stranger for a hug. She never could have imagined that simple prank would lead her here to him. Behind her, Dante moved with lethal grace, pouring 2 glasses of wine. The clink of crystal against marble echoed in the quiet room. Even now, after everything they'd been through, he commanded attention without trying. His presence filled every space he occupied. "Remembering something?" he asked, his voice low and rich as he approached. Violet accepted the glass he offered, allowing herself a small smile. "Just thinking about how we met. I was so naive then." "You were fearless," Dante corrected, his free hand settling possessively on her hip. "Still are." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. This was the real Dante, not the cold-blooded mafia boss who struck terror into his enemies, but the man who held her like she was precious and dangerous all at once. "The whole city thinks you're a monster," she murmured, watching their reflection. "If only they knew how gentle you can be." His grip tightened slightly. "Only with you," he said against her ear. "Always only with you." Violet turned in his arms, meeting his dark gaze. The ruthlessness was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But now she understood it. His violence, his control, his power. It was all armor, protecting what mattered most. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Letting me into your world?" Dante set his glass down, framing her face with both hands. "Never," he said firmly. "You're mine, Violet. The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner." She reached up, tracing the scar along his jaw, a reminder of the battles they'd survived together. "And you're mine," she whispered. "The good, the bad, all of it." His kiss was gentle but possessive, a perfect reflection of the man himself. When he pulled back, his eyes held a promise that made her heart race. "The families won't like that you've made me your equal," she said. A dangerous smile curved his lips. "Let them try to challenge us. They'll learn what happens when someone threatens what's mine." Violet knew it wasn't an idle threat. She'd seen firsthand what Dante was capable of, the lengths he'd go to protect what he loved. But instead of fear, she felt only certainty. This was where she belonged, in his arms, in his world, by his side. The city stretched out before them, a kingdom of shadows and light. Their future was uncertain, filled with dangers they'd face together. But as Dante held her close, Violet knew one thing for certain. The prank that had started it all hadn't just changed her life, it had saved them both. The city lights twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting a soft glow across Violet and Dante as they stood together. The silence between them was comfortable now, unlike the tense moments that had defined their early days. Dante's arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, his touch both protective and tender. Violet leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It amazed her how this man, this dangerous, powerful figure who commanded fear and respect, could hold her with such gentleness. The same hands that had dealt death and violence now traced soft patterns on her skin. "Do you ever think about that night at the bar?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I asked you to pretend to hug me?" Dante's chest rumbled with a low chuckle. "The night you walked straight into the lion's den without knowing it?" His grip tightened slightly. "I knew then that you'd be trouble." Violet turned in his arms to face him, studying the sharp angles of his face, the darkness in his eyes that had once terrified her but now felt like home. "And now? Now?" His voice dropped lower, taking on that commanding tone that still sent shivers down her spine. "Now you're mine, forever." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "And I'll destroy anyone who tries to change that." The threat in his words should have frightened her, but Violet only felt safer. She'd seen the lengths he'd go to protect what was his. She'd witnessed his violence, his ruthlessness, his power. But she'd also seen his vulnerability, the cracks in his armor that only she was allowed to see. "And you're mine," she whispered back, reaching up to trace the scar on his jaw, a reminder of the battles they'd survived together. The feared Mafia boss, brought to his knees by a simple prank. His eyes darkened at her teasing, and before she could react, he had her pressed against the window, his body caging her in. "Careful, Kara," he growled, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Even now, you play with fire." Violet smiled, unafraid. "Maybe I've learned to love the burn." Dante's expression softened for a moment, that rare, unguarded look that was reserved only for her. Then he kissed her, fierce and possessive, marking her as his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll protect you always," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "This world, my world, it's dangerous, but you'll always be safe with me." Violet wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him close. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I stayed." They remained there, wrapped in each other's arms as the city continued its endless dance below them. Their love story wasn't perfect. It was built on violence, forged in fire, and tested by blood. But it was theirs, and they'd fight to protect it until their last breath. In the end, that was all that mattered. The city lights sparkled beneath them like scattered diamonds, a view Violet had grown familiar with from Dante's penthouse. But tonight felt different. Her hand was intertwined with his, their fingers locked together in a way that felt both possessive and tender. Dante's thumb traced lazy circles on her skin, a gesture that would have once made her flinch but now brought comfort. His presence beside her was solid, unwavering like the empire they'd built together. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice low and rough. That night, at the bar, Violet turned to face him, studying the sharp lines of his profile. The man who had once terrified her was still dangerous. She'd seen enough of his world to know that would never change, but now she understood the complexity beneath his cold exterior. "No," she said simply. "Even knowing everything that would happen, the danger, the violence, all of it, I'd still walk up to you and say those words." His grip tightened on her hand. "Pretend to hug me," he quoted, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Who would have thought those 3 words would lead to all this? She gestured at the cityscape before them, their territory, their kingdom. Dante pulled her closer, his arms sliding around her waist. The warmth of his body against hers was familiar now, safe despite everything they'd been through. "You changed everything, Violet," he murmured against her hair. "My world was darkness until you walked into it." She leaned into him, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to their empire, but they would face them together. She was no longer the woman who needed his protection. She was his equal, his partner in every sense. "We're unstoppable together," she whispered, and felt his chest rumble with quiet laughter. "That we are, amore." He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes intense as they met hers. "And anyone who tries to come between us will regret it," she finished, and reached up to trace the scar along his jaw, a reminder of their last battle, of everything they'd survived. The kiss they shared was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that had brought them together. But that was their story, beauty born from darkness, love forged in fire. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Violet knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, in this dangerous, beautiful world they'd created together. With the man who'd shown her that love could be both tender and fierce, gentle and wild. The city stretched out before them, full of shadows and light, danger and possibility. But they would face it all together. The Mafia boss and the woman who dared to love him, bound by a connection that nothing could break. It had started with a prank, a moment of mischief in a crowded bar. But it had become something more, something powerful, unbreakable, and entirely their own. And that was just the beginning. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting a golden glow across Violet's face as she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the city was coming to life, but up here, in their sanctuary, time seemed to stand still. She felt Dante's presence before she heard him, that magnetic pull that had drawn them together from the beginning. His footsteps were silent on the marble floor, but his energy filled the room. When his arms wrapped around her waist from behind, she leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low and intimate against her ear. Violet smiled, placing her hands over his. "About how far we've come. From that night at the bar when I asked a stranger to hug me to now." Dante's chest rumbled with a quiet laugh. "You had no idea who you were dealing with." "Neither did you," she countered, turning in his arms to face him. His dark eyes, once so cold and distant, now held a warmth reserved only for her. He traced her jawline with his thumb, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of violence. "You changed everything, Violet. My world was darkness until you walked into it." "Our world," she corrected him, reaching up to touch his face. "We built this together." Dante's expression softened, showing that rare vulnerability that only she was allowed to see. "Together," he agreed, pulling her closer. "And anyone who tries to tear us apart will fail," Violet finished, her voice firm. She knew the dangers that still lurked in the shadows of their life, but she no longer feared them. With Dante, she had found not just love, but strength. They walked hand in hand through their empire that day, their power evident in every respectful nod. every careful glance. But it wasn't the fear they commanded that mattered anymore. It was the love they'd found in the darkness, the light they'd created together. As evening fell, they returned to their penthouse. Dante pulled Violet into his arms, his kiss deep and possessive. When they finally broke apart, his eyes held hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "You're mine," he whispered, the words both a promise and a prayer. Violet smiled, her heart full. "And you're mine," she replied, knowing that some things were meant to be, even if they started with a prank and ended in forever. In the fading light, they stood together, their silhouettes merging into one. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their love a beacon in the night. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the Mafia boss who learned to love and the woman who tamed his heart. Their story wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about triumph. In each other, they had found not just love, but redemption, strength, and a future worth fighting for. And in the end, that was all that mattered. If you enjoyed the story of Violet Carmichael, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.